Yeah, it should be working now. Thank you, everyone. I know it's a post-lunch last day when everyone's trying to have meetings panels, so I do appreciate people showing up. It is going to be exciting because why AgTech is always exciting, even though people don't believe it, versus FinTech. I'm really, really gracious and grateful that these panelists have agreed to join us and share their experiences, pains, and challenges. So I'll get right into it. The basic context for this panel is around agricultural technology, future food systems, and emerging technologies' role in that, since we are at a Africa Tech Summit. The context in the end is where we have 500 million smallholder farmers supporting 2 billion plus people. These farms produce up to 80% of the food produced that is eaten, depending on the research you look at, but let's say it's somewhere in there. And yet we have food insecurity, and all of these challenges and numbers are exacerbated by the impacts of climate change. So we're really looking at, what are the technologies and opportunities to increase climate adaptation for people who are in food systems and working, whether it be farmers or stakeholders along the chain. So I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves, and I'll start with you, Hafsah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hafsah Jumare. I run a company that runs an AgTech platform called CoAmana. We operate in Kenya and Nigeria, and I look forward to, having this conversation.
So my name is Goslinga. I'm the co-founder and president of Pula. We develop and distribute agriculture insurance products to, last year, about 3 million farmers across 13 markets in Africa. Next up.
Hi, I'm Seema Gohil. I lead Digifarm. We're a platform that connects smallholder farmers to product, services, and markets, and have an embedded financing layer as well.
Hi, I'm Okech, founder and chief imagination officer of AquaRech. We are a startup that is using mobile app technology to enable small and medium-sized fish farmers to access top quality feeds, provide market linkage, access to credit, and we also offer technical support. Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. So Rose, I'm going to start with you in a sense. Can you give us like a snapshot or a reflection of kind of the challenges and opportunities you saw when you envisioned Pula and kind of help understand that, or try to help that context understand kind of that journey and understand the snapshot you saw?
Okay. So I always joke that I'm kind of a dog with a bone. I've done ag insurance now my first project in ag insurance was in 2008. I don't know how long ago that is. But it's definitely more than, we're at 15 years now, something like that. And I think if you work at something for such a long time, you've made all the mistakes. You have sinned. You have done all the things wrong that could possibly go wrong. And you've contributed to it, right? So you've done the things that could go wrong, and everything in insurance, When we started off, we thought that you could sell insurance to farmers individually. When we started off, we thought that at some point I ran 200 weather stations. At some point I thought everything could be solved through satellite technology. At some point I got stoned by farmers, right? If you get it wrong, because you do insurance, and when you sell insurance, it's a promise. And I think that if you think about all those things that you get wrong, then hopefully, if your business is still there, you've survived and you've figured out, what you probably should be doing, right? So if I think about one of the key lessons, with insurance, we've learned that insurance is embedded. It's never sold by itself. It always comes inside of some kind of financial transaction. It's embedded with a bank loan product with the Digifarm people. It's embedded with a farm input subsidy program of a government. It's embedded in a humanitarian or disaster relief program. All those different parts, but it never stands by itself. If you think about how you actually put your product on the ground, as I said, ag insurance in developed markets where your average farmer pays $15,000 worth of premium. Our premium last year was $10 a farmer. Relies on farm visits. You visit the farm at the start of the season, halfway through, and at the end. And that works if you're collecting $15,000 worth of premium, but doesn't work if you're collecting 10, right? So, everybody here I know this is a tech conference, right? But I think in our community, we have a sense of jumping to the tech and then only using the tech. And I think particularly if you work in agriculture, the thing that you find is that you need a combination. You need that your customers can trust and feel and touch something. And in our case, that ended up being kind of like rural field agents who did harvests. And satellite data still helps us and helps guide those people, but isn't the only solution. So we ended up having, at any point in time now, we have 1,500 rural field agents who effectively have as gig work doing harvests for us. I didn't think we would have that when we started. I thought we were going to use technology. I have a TED Talk that talks all about technology, and every time I see it, I'm like, oh my God, what did I say? You know? So I think, you know, if you do something for a very long time, if you have not gotten a whole bunch of things wrong, you probably were faking it. That's my perspective. You will have but if you are still doing it after, like in my case, about 15 years, and your company has, you know, grows 90% year on year, right? Doubles effectively. Then the things that you have gotten right, thankfully outnumbered. Or at least, you know, the things that you've gotten wrong, you learned fast enough. So I think learning in this space is so important. And like being so open about the things that you're not getting right. Because the earlier you are open about not getting them right, the earlier you start solving them, right? Like I know what my priorities are for this year. I know that my insurance companies that I partner with, we partner with like 70 of them and 20 plus reinsurers, that they're slow. So I might start a reinsurance company, right? Or I might start a pool of fund for that. Or I'll figure out with some kind of blockchain solution if we can make this faster. But the first thing comes with acknowledging that there's a problem, right?
Okay, thank you. Seema, I'm going to jump to you, and I know we'll build on some of the things that Rose mentioned, especially around data capture and the tech touch balance. But yeah, I want to hear about kind of your reflections working, you know, with Acumen, advising AgTech startups, and then now with Digifarm, kind of on reflections of where AgTech has come, some of the challenges, and kind of successes in the past, let's say, 10 years.
Sure, thanks. And maybe I'll build on kind of what Rose said, actually, because she touched on this problem of a single solution. And I think that's a lot of what we saw and continue seeing as a challenge in ag or ag tech is a lot of single solutions, and that fragmentation is really hard, right? Because you either have like this, the individual solution can't scale, or you can't reach enough farmers to hit commercial sustainability in time, right? And so you run out of funding, or you just can't scale fast enough. So I think that's one of the most critical challenges, actually, is this idea of single solutions or kind of fragmentation across the market that we've seen. I think the other big one is financing, right? So even if you have a solution, can farmers afford it? We're seeing that change over time. There's a lot of innovation going on around pay-as-you-go models if you have assets against it, pay-per-service models, so we're seeing that a little bit in cold storage. But between financing and, you know, kind of this fragmentation in the market, it's incredibly hard, I think, to get to commercial sustainability, and we've kind of seen that a little bit across that. And then I think the last part that's really unique in agriculture is how unique every single value chain is, right? So when you look at aquaculture versus, you know, you kind of go into avocado farming for exports, completely different. And the variability in each one of them makes it really hard to take a single ag tech platform or solution and then, again, get it to scale, because there's localization, there's, you know, each product needs a different service. And I think that's kind of also been a little bit of a challenge.
So I'm going to hone in and have one quick follow-up, because I know we had some conversations around, like if I had say, let's say name 2 or 3 that you think are key things that are barriers or like creating friction for the scale and things that you mentioned before.
Barriers, I think I'll go back to the fragmentation, right? It's the distribution or the reach. So in order to hit scale, because if you're selling solutions that, you know, you're not making 15,000 per premium, or it's $10 or 10 shillings per premium, you then need to be able to get to scale. To get to scale, distribution becomes extremely challenging. And when you have to build out an entire distribution network and you have products and services which aren't always digital, right? In agriculture, it's, you know, you've got to move produce, you've got to move fertilizer, you have to move all of these things. And so that becomes a key barrier, is the distribution network or the cost of reaching a last mile customer. So that's incredibly expensive. So I think that's one key barrier. I think the other one that we, you know, as much as we want to deny it, there's external variables that we're very sensitive to in agriculture as well, right? It's pests, it's climate shocks, it's all these additional external variables that come into play. And those two make it extremely challenging as well to continue scaling solutions. I think the last one is also usage and adoption. So especially when you're looking at early stage innovations or new innovations or places where you're trying to change behavior. That's a longer term cycle, and a lot of times, either startups or early stage companies don't necessarily have the bandwidth to be able to sustain that or to drive that behavior change because it might take a much longer time as well.
I'm going to go right to Hafsah since we were literally talking about some behavior change items right about 10 minutes ago. But also, I think yesterday when we were having a conversation with Dave, and you really mentioned
bit of context. When we started this, like at the very start, CoAmana, we developed a product. We thought farmers will just jump on the platform and use it. I think like Rose, we had a lot of lessons, right? And we just expected, I think, the farmers to switch to a certain way of doing things without focusing on how they're currently doing things, right? Like what behaviors work for them, what networks work for them. And I think I see a lot of, I think, not just AgTech people in the ag space making the same mistake, right? You come in, you assume this simple farmer that had no history before you, and you assume you're going to bring a fancy product and they just jump in. But you forget that they were farming before you. Majority of agriculture trade is still done outside of like any digital system. There are networks that really already work for them, and they're like, especially with the marketplace, like we are like an ag trade platform, right? I've not seen a single ag trade platform that has kind of replaced the networks of like market hubs, farming hubs. Like you can trace these networks from like Ethiopia to Kano, like you literally see trucks there, right? And there's data in the minds of actors. And like a lot of behavior is driven by that, right? They're very linked. So I think sometimes we develop platforms thinking that we're going to come in and just disrupt the system rather than like fit into it and enable it and actually look at what has worked. And so in the context of behavior change, I think that has been a shift for us in the way we approach the market and farmers. And I think we're seeing it work.
Great. And Dave, I'll come to you to kind of explain your inspiration for AquaRech, but also kind of reflections on what they're saying in terms of, do you see similar barriers and how the team's approaching it there?
Yeah, so AquaRech was actually formed out of my experience as a fish farmer in Lake Victoria. And the need arose out of the challenges that we were experiencing as a group of farmers out of lack of access to the top quality feeds that commercial farms are using, which could prolong our production period by up to 13 months. The sector is still very highly fragmented, and that meant difficulty in moving the fish from the farm to the consumer. I mean, there wasn't any So the innovation was actually formed out of that necessity to bring together the different players in the aquaculture sector, where you could build a trusted relationship between you as a farmer and the input supplier, which could earn you some credit, or you could build a trusted relationship between you as a farmer and the fish traders. So what we have seen over a period of time is technology has played a critical role in each of the value chain nodes of the aquaculture sector. So from the production side, bringing in technology there has really accelerated access to top quality feeds, which in turn has led to increased productivity. And what that means is more people get access to fish as a source of protein, and people get access to fish as for trading. When you go to the marketing side, technology has played a critical role there. So bringing in more people on that side of the equation to trade on fish and access fish. When you go to the distribution side, when you go to the equipment supply side of the value chain, where you now have, because of that increased productivity and market access, cold chain suppliers are starting to get into the space. So there is a lot that by bringing in technology in an agricultural value chain, you get to unlock some of the barriers that have been there because of lack of trading relationship between the value chain actors.
Cool, thank you. So I'm going to try to summarize what I'm hearing so far is we've had progress, we've had maybe lessons around instead of trying to disrupt, trying to engage and incorporate into platform or solutions. At the same time, the data that's being captured may be siloed and maybe a barrier to kind of increasing being able to work together and then going towards scale. So one, please feel free to disagree with me and be opinionated because I'm happy to have some conflict on the panel and make it fun. But two, if I'm close to that, then I'm gonna jump to Rose and say, from your perspective, like, are there opportunities from tech and, a platform that now has a bit of growth stage, if you want to call it, to like, how would you approach either partnering or incorporating more emerging tech to kind of address some of these barriers?
So I would really agree with what Hafsah said. And I remember, like you always start with if you're working in agri or if you're working in agri-tech, you start with what people already understand to use. Like if they don't understand what you're using, or if you're gonna, let's say for example, I'll take my own example of insurance. If you're trying to teach them this new thing called insurance, you better do it through a technology that they also understand. I remember in the very beginning we used QR codes. We were the first offerer of QR codes, and we were doing it with insurance. And it was such a bad idea. Man, it was such a bad idea. Why? Because these people didn't know what a QR code was. So we were trying to show these shopkeepers how to use QR codes. Now this makes total sense, right? Because we've seen this and we know that in China they use this all the time, and we're kind of seeing it in other cases. But if you're trying to sell insurance, do it through the channels that exist, right? So I remember Ken Jaroge of Cellulant telling me, so why aren't you just using USSD? Because everybody already knows how to use USSD. And I was like, no, we want to do this new thing. And I was fresh off the boat, right? So I had no clue. So I think, I think if I listen to you, and this is not going to be controversial, but I think it is controversial because all of us come into this space and then want to do this new thing with this new shiny thing, and a lot of the funding goes to the new shiny thing, and I have a program, like you always try to make me talk about, we have this program together with big insurtech and it uses crypto and blockchain. Every time you make me talk about it, I'm like, please no, because I'm not sure if it'll work, right? And there's so many new things going on, right? So my perspective on this is that what the sector really needs is to, particularly in agriculture, somebody yesterday called me, this is a super earnest university girl, was asking, was doing her university project, and every once in a while I get those emails and I'm like, okay, fine, I'll talk to this one. I don't know, random selection, right? And she's like, why don't we use soil sensors so that we can get farmers to understand when to plant, because there's so much climate change. And my perspective was just like, okay, but they don't even know which type of fertilizer would give them the biggest trade-off, right? So my perspective on all this stuff, I think there's the non-controversial thing, I think, in agriculture is to say, hey, we should use channels that people are comfortable with in terms of technology. That's the non-controversial thing I'll say. The controversial thing I'll say is that we should partner with governments, which I think is the controversial thing to say, but which, if we actually understand agriculture, and if we're serious about all these social impact monitoring things, we should understand that the biggest
Digifarm, who does figure out how to work with governments, but also, going to I kind of agree with both Rose and Hafsah in terms of anything consumer facing should integrate into the world that and how they operate. I do have a hypothesis that for what you're talking about in scale and these data silos and other things that we've talked about that some of the emerging tech on the back end may have a play. And so maybe I can see where your thinking on that is, especially if it may be useful in working with governments and where trust and transparency can be built.
Yeah. And I'm going to disagree with Rose that I don't think it's a
love
controversial
it.
statement, actually.
Oh, that's not controversial at all.
I agree with you, right? Like, I think you're right in the sense that, like, the government, it doesn't matter what country you are in Africa, the government is a key player. And partnering, I think, is a key solution. I think public-private partnerships have been seen to work really well as long as you have the right frameworks and the right setups. So definitely agree with you on that one. I guess your question around, like, where is the role of Digifarm? I'm sorry, I kind of missed that.
Excuse me?
Could you repeat the first part of the question?
No, yeah, I think it's more like as you think about, newish role with a director of Digifarm and how maybe you want to shape and what it wants to be as a platform and where people can plug in. Is there a role for emerging tech, whether it's blockchain, Web3, others, where it can unlock maybe transparency and more trust? Because again, I have a hypothesis that is a barrier right now for people who have gotten to certain stages for working. I'm not saying as a consumer-facing thing. I totally agree that we shouldn't have that as a training piece, but as on a back end where potentially people can partner easier.
Yeah.
And so.
So to add to that, I guess, two important points that they both brought up as well. On the tech side, I'll be honest, our team's done that as well, right? The other day, I was talking to our tech team, and we have this beautiful app that we've spent a lot of time on. And I'm like, that's great, but 60% of our customers, more than that, are on a USSD channel, right? And so let's build for the customer. Now, there's a journey that can change over time. And I think those journeys allow for more richer content for the delivery of different services. I think that journey exists, and I think that will happen over time, but we have to build for the customer that exists today and for what their behaviors are today. And I think, to your point, we jump too quickly into technologies. And then I think Hafsah mentioned the idea of being an enabler, right? And I think that's really where platforms have a key role to play as an enabler for existing systems, right? It's not necessarily to say, let's go build a whole new system, but how do we enable systems, market players that are already existing, right? So when you think of the product side, you already have inputs distributors, you already have soil testing services, you have insurance providers. You do have on the market side, buyers exist as well. So as a platform, I think the key thing that we can do is really bring the ecosystem together and accelerate this idea of bundled services, right? So as I was saying earlier, key challenge is individual solutions trying to reach scale, and that becomes really hard. But when you create a bundle of services that you can go to a customer with, that becomes much easier for not only the customer, who now has a seamless service and can access all of them with a single point of contact, but it also enables all the other partners and products to reach the same scale as well. It drives down that cost of actually distributing the product, right? So I think from a platform perspective, that becomes a really core enabler or co-part of what we can add to the ecosystem is bringing it all together, but then providing that reach and scalability that we've been seeing struggling in the market today.
Great. So Hafsah, now that you've kind of heard Seema's vision of how potentially earlier or newer companies can plug into platforms, others, how do you think about CoAmana and where you'd want to build and things that, again, I really love this, ecosystem of data around farmers and the linkages and the things you're building, then how could that plug in to potentially accelerate the scale?
So funny enough, as a company, we've conceptualized every possible way of getting people's data and data exchange, from possibly having a partnerships platform to actually a data exchange platform. Our experience is, so let me take it back to last year, right? There were all these flood incidents around Nigeria, and we ended up with a supply chain risk, right? Things not getting to markets. And so one thing we realized at the time was that we needed to kind of start figuring out how to de-risk ourselves. And we began to put away like a bit of our transactions to kind of finance, self-insure. And we spoke to like several insurance providers, and the reality is nobody was insuring at the community level. There's not enough spread of community data to actually do that type of insurance, right? Turn it into insurable risk. But at micro levels, different people have this data somewhere, somehow, right? And if that was aggregated, like it would have like solved our own supply chain problem, but that wasn't solved. We've also had like price risk, for instance, before things get to market. Like all of a sudden, there's like supply of potatoes. You could have predicted it by looking at yield data, right? Knowing that, however, because you don't have that data at the time, so there is a lot of value to like data exchange that can really de-risk the market for buyers, for farmers. Like people complain about middlemen. Middlemen are just the people that have the most market data, sorry. And they're like absorbing the like price risk that occurs, right? Which is why they just charge high in the market. But all of that could go away with very rich data. I know like Web3 is an opportunity for people to kind of verify things without really exchanging data. What I hope happens in the future is that like we have a situation where we're able to aggregate this data. Even bad data is good data. The person collecting bad data, you can profile them based on that. Like, but we have the opportunity to aggregate data and actually make decisions as like different companies, but together.
Dave, how are you thinking about AquaRech, especially given, now you're, getting to a point where you want to get the product market fit and really start thinking about growing some of the pilots and partnerships that you have. Has data been a barrier, or has it been a barrier to partnerships, or how's the team thinking about it there?
Yeah. So if you look at the role of technology in the food system space, is that it needs to make the sector inclusive and sustainable. And to make the sector inclusive and sustainable, one of the ways that technology will achieve that is by making the sector transparent. And the transparency here will then allow various sector players to get into the value chain and explore what is there. So by making it more transparent, you are bringing in inclusivity in that front. Now, if technology achieves the role of providing data management side of the farmer, to the farmer, in a way that the farmer is now able to demonstrate his fish farming activities through data. And that data can then be translated to a financing tool by connecting that data to the financial sector. Then you realize that the farmers who were unbankable because of lack of data, because they didn't have a platform to record that data, now become bankable. And through that, you develop an inclusive sector, because then finance starts to become easily accessible, because you can leverage on that data to negotiate for financial institutions to come in and provide finance as an incentive. Now, as AquaRech, as we try to, bring in more farmers on the data side of the platform, and also bring in more traders, the key to us is to really leverage on what kind of data can farmers generate out of that platform, and how can we use this data to approach financial institutions, which can then use it as a point of reference to finance farmers, because by doing so, we are going to open up thousands of unbankable farmers to now be able to start accessing finance, which is critical to increasing or maintaining productivity. When you also look at the other side that we are exploring on the role of climate smart or data-driven fish farming, we are exploring different options, some of which include use of big data, like the big data sets like IoT devices, that can enable farmers to practice precision feeding, which goes a long way in building their resilience to climate change. So that's how we are approaching, and what we want to see happen now and in the near future is a platform that any farmer in sub-Saharan Africa is able to plug into, that he can leverage in to move from what you call peasant farming to profitable fish farming.
Great, thanks. I'm going to leave 5 minutes at the end for some questions, so please get your notes ready. I'm going to jump to you, Rose, and ask, from what you've heard, are there, what would be advice, let's say if I was starting an ag startup, although I may be scared to hear that, but also in terms of how people should think about the role of technology and how they may be able to partner with larger platforms, let's say Pula or Digifarm.
So the first thing is that starting your own business is hard. I would say the second thing is that it's kind of like the priesthood, right? So it's kind of like a calling. So you better have a really great co-founder that you're going to do this with, because that is how you will power through stuff. So that would be just remember that this is going to be hard, and at some point you'll be curled up on the couch kind of crying. I remember those days. And they still happen every once in a while, right? And that the best thing is find a really good, cool person that you're going to do that with. Because you will need each other. I would say the other advice, we bootstrapped for the first 3 years. And so we did not raise any external capital. And that meant that from the beginning, I remember when we talked to our first investors, we had revenue. And that really changes your negotiation position when you talk to investors, that you have a model that clients have validated because you built it for a client. And you did not, we bootstrapped from a perspective of that, we had, from the beginning, we kind of knew that this is the client, let's see if they'll pay for it. We did consulting stuff on the side so that we would churn the profits back into the business. And it can be extremely, I still have a fair amount of PTSD. You've never, for the first 3 years, we never had more than 3 months of runway, right? But it does change how you set up your business. It does change how you interact with investors. And I think that matters a lot. I don't hear a lot of people doing it. I don't I have a lot of friends who from the beginning, raise money. And if I would do it again, I would bootstrap again.
Okay.
I would not go straight to, and people would do it, right? Because you've already started up a company, and I would still not do it. Because I think it changes the power dynamics. It changes how you set up your business. It changes how you focus your business. I had somebody come to me the other day, and they were setting up a business, and they were thinking about how they would pitch it to investors, and they were not thinking about how they would pitch it to a client. They were like, no, that will come. And I kind of wanted to slap the person. I was like, who cares, man? I'm not in that game. So yeah, does that help?
Yeah, it helps. Hopefully it helps the entrepreneur sitting here. We can have Hafsah. Does that help?
It really does. And we also bootstrapped through the first few years. So I'm glad to hear that that's a good way to do it. And I agree. So I think the value for us, I've seen companies, even today, I'm like, oh my God, you have so much money. Can we get that? But the value is that we did a lot of testing, on our own dime, and failing and being able to kind of figure out market fit without giving bonanzas to our clients to scale. So I think the bootstrap is definitely a good advice, yeah.
Seema, I'm going to come to you before I kind of try to pause for some questions and ask, we've mentioned Dave talk about they're trying to capture data, let's say at very ground level, granular level, using technology and touch. How would Digifarm think about what the kind of the criteria is to make sure that you have trust in that it's validated or a certain amount of verification, so then you feel that the partnership is worth it for, let's say, a large platform, and that there's trust among the consumers you're going to open up, right? Because I have plenty of people here who want to talk to you as you're walking out as the director of Digifarm. But so I think, what would I say to them and say, well, here's the things you need to have in order?
it's a tough question because there's no right answer, right? There's no perfect checklist, and I wish I had that. Data verification is incredibly hard and challenging. And it depends on the source, it depends on value chain, it depends on, kind of a lot of those things. So no is the answer to that, right? I think in terms of when I think of data in general, right, and what's usable and what's not, really verifying the source of the data, right? How it was collected. Was it collected with consent? I think for me, and generally, I think that's usually one of the biggest first questions. Do you have consent? Do you have consent to share that data with somebody, or even in a partnership, right? And I think some of those things, as an early stage company or startup, you don't always think about because you're bootstrapping or you're kind of trying to get your product out there. But as you kind of grow and scale, become more and more important. So, processes sometimes feel like they're a burden in the beginning, but ensuring that you have the right processes so that when you do bring on additional partners in the future, you have those frameworks, I think are worth taking the extra hour or two to think through. Like, what does this mean from a data sharing perspective, from a consumer privacy perspective? So I think on that data side, it's incredibly, I think, important to have that. And then I think from a criteria perspective, it then becomes like, how do you ingest that data to make it usable then for the customer, right? So again, like I can take amazing satellite imagery, right? And you can get all of that data, but if it's not usable to the end customer because, again, they're in a USSD channel, they can't open up, your fancy map, it doesn't quite work, right? And so I think that would be kind of the other part of the tech.
Great. So I know we're almost short on time, so I'll open up for some Q&A, but before that, I just want to see if any of the panelists want to ask a question to each other, since I've been the only one doing the questions.
When are we able to verify things against your data? I think Digifarm has probably the most comprehensive access to data in Kenya, and Pula maybe on the continent. So I guess when we drop hints about like needing like a data platform, we refer to you guys.
You go first. Okay, so I think in one of our first clients, one of my very first client made me comply with GDPR, by the way, and like get informed consent. So like if you have clients from the beginning, they will make you do these kind of things. With that very first client, I was super protective of data. I thought that data was actually worth something, and I think what I like protected it with tooth and nail, and I nearly killed my business. And I think now the way that we look at this is, data that is protected tooth and nail. Yeah, it's our data. We have a lot of yield data, but I don't actually see, or I don't put a dollar value on a data point. I could, and my finance guys heavily disagree with what I'm just saying. But everybody who runs a pure data business, you could say I run a data business, but I run an insurance business because insurance is the use case of what we do, of the data. And like if somebody would come to me and say, hey, I would like to use your data for X, we just give it. Like our perspective is not like data that only sits with us is dead data, right? Data that starts doing other things in other places is alive. And I have a lot of respect for people, for example, who there's a lot of businesses in ag who try to give farmers advice. And it's like advice is kind of like data, try to put it to action and get people to pay for that. It's near impossible. So my perspective on this is look, the data is there. If people ask us, I think the other thing, and this is where I think government also does come in, and data is often a public good. I'm an economics major. Data is a public good in the end. And I think what we do in a lot of the places where we work, we try to share the data with government so that it becomes part of a larger public data set. And, that also protects us a bit because it becomes then kind of standardized, a bit more, aggregated up so you don't go to our individual data points, and that protects us a bit. At the same time, it gives data to a wider community. I sound like my econ professor, but yeah.
I mean, I love the quote to end on it, data that sits with you is dead data versus data that's shared is actually live data and actionable. So yeah. I'm happy to pause there unless anyone wants to jump in. Please do. Any questions out in the audience? Come on, it's AgTech. I know it's super sexy. You all have questions. All right, up. I see.
There's two.
Someone. It's hard to see. Oh, we have a few. All right.
I love it.
Anouk, was that you with the question? Go for it. I'm sure we can hear you.
I do have a very loud voice. So I'm not sure you guys can hear me.
We can.
Oh, there's a mic.
Yeah, we can hear
There's
you.
a
But
mic.
go for it.
Hi everyone, my name is Anouk. I'm with Farm to Feed. I do have a question. You were talking a lot about like USSD and that the people that you serve, that they have this level of tech. So when do you think is that, because everybody is going more into tech, there's going to be a new generation, when do you think is the pivotal point that we have more tech-based community out there versus a community that did the way it was always done?
This one's for you.
I think that one's for you, Seema.
Sure.
I agree with Rose.
I'll tackle that. I think USSD is a channel, right? And I guess I was probably the one that was talking about it a little bit more, but so let me explain that a little bit. The tech exists, and when I think of tech, we already are incorporating satellite data. They're already incorporating yield prediction, right? And that you can still provide through even a USSD channel, right? So that just becomes a channel to provide a service. So using, I think, tech, big data, to unlock solutions and then provide it through a certain channel is already happening, right? And we're just taking and ingesting it, whether it's Digifarm, whether it's Pula, whether it's CoAmana, like all the tech companies here are using data and technology in a certain way to already now bring it to the consumer. I think the digitization will happen probably faster than we think it will, right? Because when you look at the cost of devices, the cost of data generally, that continues to drop year on year, right? And I think that acceleration we'll keep seeing. Kenya, I think, has been one of the faster ones in East Africa to I guess, adopt more technology. And so I don't have a specific year or an answer for you, but I think we are seeing that. I think, generally the government has announced plans as well to help drive some of those digitization journeys. And so I think we'll continue to see that.
Any other questions?
There was two. There was another guy.
I can't see. Lights are on.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, there's someone in the middle. Maybe you could just stand up and shout. We can probably hear you. Oh, sorry.
Okay, my name is Maureen Kamau. I have two questions. I come from the farming community. So my first question is there opportunity to work with middlemen? I know people don't like middlemen. Or these organizations that help farmers sell their produce. And I'll paint a picture. In my home, we grow tea, and we also do dairy farming, okay? So what happens is, with the dairy companies, when they come to collect milk, we make orders for animal feeds. And then the next day, when they're coming to collect milk again, they deliver their animal feeds, and then they'll deduct that money from whatever yield that was gotten from the milk yield. So you see, these people have data about the farmer, the farmer's produce, how much are they able to make in a month? And I think that would be helpful. So does any of you have it in their roadmap to work with those?
So this is right up your alley, Hafsah. I mean,
Yeah. Okay, so I genuinely think middlemen have such a bad rep. Like I've never seen a scenario in the world where people apply the laws of economics differently than in the smallholder farmer situation, right? And anywhere in the world, there are a lot of brokers that are helping people connect to other people, buyers and sellers, and actually kind of playing the role of bridging the market gap, right? And in cases where brokers have all the information, they end up charging a lot, right? In cases where there are a few brokers, those brokers end up being the people that kind of control the market. But in situations where the consumers are well informed, the brokers end up with very low margins, right? They're just doing, so middlemen are effectively like that as far as I'm concerned. And it worries me kind of how people treat smallholder farmers, because they treat them as like different humans. Laws of economics change. They don't apply in that situation. We don't like working with middlemen because our funders don't like working with middlemen. But I sincerely think if you can solve the market information problem and the access problem, that advantage the middlemen had go away. But the reality is, like, for over 1,000 years, they've been the one doing most of the agriculture trade. You'll find a middleman going to the most random community during the last mile, right? There's an opportunity to actually work with them to change things on the continent. However, the reluctance to have a conversation about it or even acknowledge it, or even the fear of companies like us to work with them, right? Like, fix the market, give information. Like, I think when we don't start having those conversations, we're going to miss this entire network of people that actually reach farmers.
Thank you. I think we have to wrap up. I'm sorry, but I think the next session may be starting to come in.
I still had one more question.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. Is there, in your roadmaps, is there a plan to use blockchain? Because the challenge I've seen with farmers is they don't like sharing information even amongst themselves. That's why middlemen take advantage. One farmer will sell a bunch of spinach at 3 shillings. The other one sells at 5 shillings, depending on the middleman who got there. So maybe there's an opportunity to work with the blockchain. So I hope that there is a plan in your roadmap.
You said there was one more question? Or no? Oh, in the back, in the middle, I think.
I have a question about collaboration with governments. Given what you said about that it's inevitable that for a startup to at some point partner with governments if they want to scale.
Excuse me, it's hard to hear. I'm not sure if it's a microphone or I think up here a lot of us couldn't.
Us? What about now?
It's a little bit better.
Yeah? Okay, I'll probably speak louder. Oh, partnering with governments. Given that you said that it's inevitable at certain stage to partner with them, and also what we know about how states operate, they are slow, they politicize things unnecessarily. I'm curious about what the ripe entry points that you see that your respective organizations have to partner with governments so that they can support you and vice versa.
So I'd say our business relies on partnerships. We partner with people like Digifarm. We partner with government. And if you, like in our business, and particularly in insurance, all across the world in developed markets, there's a very strong input and partnership with government at the core of this. So for us, we know that this is not a choice. And then you figure it out, right? From my perspective, I'll give you a practical case. We were launching a product in Kenya and we needed approval from the regulator. We chased the regulator for a couple of months, don't hear anything, and then he'll call you and tell you, I'm going to meet the commissioner now, please give me that letter in the next 5 minutes. It's now my favorite interview question if I do culture interviews with anybody joining the team, is what is your response? And I have some people who say, like I interviewed 7 people today, and one of them said, I would have a conversation later on how we could have planned that better, right? And I'm like, and there was somebody else who said, well, this is how governments work. And you've been chasing it for a long time, and then you make it your priority in the next 5 minutes to draft that letter. The next morning, this regulator called me at 6 a.m. and says, that was a good letter. I'm now going, I have a meeting with the commissioner at like 8:30. I need another letter. I need a non-objection draft. And you draft it, right? So I think if you're going to work with government, understand that government is going to set the pace. You are not the one setting the pace. Government is going to tell you what they want, and you listen. And you supply and support that. And then as you've provided what they wanted, you might also get to provide input in what they're doing. And give them advice about maybe that this idea that they had maybe wasn't the best way of looking at it, but you've tried that differently. I think what we see a lot of other partners that want to work with government say, like, look at how we have done this. Look how amazing it is. You should do it that way too. I can tell you most governments kind of like shut down if you work that way. This program might not be perfect, But if you want to reach millions, if we all talk about, and if we're serious about scale in agriculture, government will help you get to scale. And that will mean that you will make some compromises. And that will mean that you might not be exactly on time for the season. I'm used to this. I'm like, okay, so, it's February. The rains start in March and you want to start your program now. Well, that's amazing. Next year we'll be better on time. That's what I think in my head. But this year, let's get started and let's see how far we get. So you're going to have to be accommodating. Like, you go with what their plan is. Forget about what your plan was. Go with what their plan is.
All right. Go ahead.
Sorry. I guess the only thing I'd add to that is I think you mentioned in your question that it's inevitable. And I don't think that's what we're saying. I think it's one potential path, right? And I think for each company, each product, you have to evaluate whether that's the right thing for you or your company, right? So I think that's another core part of this. As Rose mentioned, you have to be at a certain stage, a certain scale, be able to work on certain timelines. And I think that's, you have to evaluate whether your team is able to do that and whether it's the right partnership for you, the same way you would evaluate any other partnership. So I don't think it's a must do, it's just one potential path.
Thank you. I know there may be more questions, but I know there's probably other panels behind this. I really want to thank all the panelists. I know they took time out of working and literally were doing emails and calls right before this. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Please give them a big round of applause. Thanks all for coming also.